Selamat pagi, good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll start this morning session in a minute, and we trust that you've had a very productive and fruitful day yesterday, and we shall continue today. We proceed with the first keynote of the day, SMAC Your Testing, how social mobile analytics and cloud technologies are reshaping QA and testing. And to deliver this keynote address is someone with more than 18 years experience in software testing, and he has extensive expertise in quality management, process improvement, testing tools, and strategy. He's also an active member of special interest groups in software testing, and he is the president of the Danish Software Testing Board. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Director for Quality Engineering and Assurance, Cognizant Denmark, Mr. John Fode.
Thank you. Thank you for a great introduction. Good morning, all. It's not the spirit. Good morning. That's better. I know it's day 3, people are tired, energy level is down. We need to bring it up a bit. So I have the honor and pleasure of being here, kicking off today's talks with a session on SMAC, Social Mobility Analytics and Cloud. The work that the presentation is based on some of the work that some of my colleagues has done over the years, much smarter than myself. They've even put a book on that, which is available actually for downloading even on your Google Play or App Store for free. So I'm actually piggybacking on some of their work. Now, when I was approached by Mr. B asking me to give a talk on a keynote basically on SMAC, I saw the theme of the conference was spearheading the business of testing. So my thought was, let's see it from a different angle. Let's first look at it from an IT and business point of view, and then see how we can plug in the testing and QA on top of that. So this is basically how my angle to my talk today. I'm gonna have a look at it from an IT and business point of view, then trying to figure out how we can basically adapt testing into that new world. Okay. Now I'm going to start with maybe some of the more depressing stuff. It's been an era of so-called great head scratching, in Europe and the US, and I think also to a certain extent in Asia. We've been hit with the so-called economical depression. Some people were out of jobs, some people needed to rotate. You've heard about that, and it has caused number of politicians, some of our leaders, to do a lot of thinking. So you have Obama, Merkel, our own Danish Prime Minister, from the UK, and I've even hit Asia to a certain extent. Now, what's interesting, and imagine that I'll be walking around a bit. I'm just afraid it's so high at this stage, if I trip and fall off, it'll be a part of the show anyway. So imagine that you'll be sitting in the board of directors at Kodak, like 10 years back. And someone will tell you that in 10 years' time, people will be taking 15 times more pictures than they're doing today. Is that good news or bad news? Good news, yeah? What happened to Kodak? Went bankrupt. So this is weird, yeah? So Kodak were leading, for example, they were leading the whole Kodak moment thing with the whole digital revolution. They were one of the first companies actually with a digital camera. Newspapers, New York Times went bankrupt, yet people are reading more and more information on a daily basis. Blockbuster. People are watching movies at home more than ever, yet Blockbuster went bankrupt. Yeah. Borders, very big bookstore. Sales of books increased by 27%, yet they collapsed. So what is happening? Maybe actually there's a reason for that. Some of my colleagues have looked into different companies and different products trying to figure out what went wrong for these companies. And they came up with some very interesting insight. Obviously, we've seen that before, that basically when each time we have a technology shift, businesses change, new business models emerge, and those companies are able to rewire, reconfigure the way they do the work, the way they adapt technologies will survive, others will just abolish and disappear. You know the case of newspapers, travel agencies, bookstores. Now, the thing is, we've only seen the top of the iceberg. A lot more of these will happen. So this technology shift is creating a disruptive model to the business. Just think about this Uber app, Now taxis are actually all around the world are, striking, creating protests because this is actually stealing away some of their customers. Airbnb, now its value, it's more than the entire Hyatt hotel chain, which just emerged the last 5 years. So this is weird. So if you take a look back, basically you see some of the technology leaders at the time, some of the leading companies, which nowadays are on the verge of collapse, or some of them have even declared bankruptcy. Now what's interesting is that those companies that are the winners of today's businesses are the ones that were able to adapt this technology shift, going from so-called widgets to digits, from bricks to clicks. So these technologies are transforming our social lives, the way we work, and the new businesses. And a new type of businesses is emerging. Ones that is actually, in the past we had these monolithic, siloed departments, organization, businesses. What is happening now with the new technology is that these are getting spread, distributed, loosely coupled, both geographically and logically. And this is all based on the so-called SMAC stack. What is a SMAC stack? First element is the social element, social computing. How many, just out of curiosity, how many of you are on Facebook? Raise your hands. How many are on LinkedIn? Twitter? Yeah. Now, I know there are a few other more, but just a sample of maybe the 3 most known. Now this is changing the way we're interacting. Yeah. Now another element is, of course, mobile. I remember my own daughter when she was 9. She got her first mobile. She was calling me all the time, and I was, never called her mother. I was myself. I was proud, She was always called me. And I remember we were sitting around the dinner table discussing, and my wife asked, "Why don't you call me? You always call your dad." And then she said, "It's because you work, Mom." No comment. To my defense, my wife is a nurse. She works in intensive care, so she's practically saving lives each day, and I'm doing this. Yeah. So in the child's mind, there's a difference between the urgency and gravity of these two things. Yeah. So basically, there's a shift of my, at least, pride and perception of the importance of the work that we're doing. Another advanced analytics. Analytics basically is the ability to analyze large quantities of data, make meaningful conclusions out of these data. Last but not least, cloud. This is basically the underlying fabric of the whole thing. So this is the multiplication of all these factors that is basically contributing to the so-called consumerization of IT. This is basically the underlying fabric of the whole digital transformation. Now, this picture, just to give you maybe some of you can recognize this. This is taken from the same spot. One in 2005, another one in 2013. Anyone can recognize the occasion? This was with the election of the former Pope Benedict XVI, and this one was taken 8 years later with the new Pope Francis. Now, what you see, there's a big difference in the adaptation of this new technology. Now, people nowadays, the way they're interacting socially is very different than actually 5-10 years back. And this technology is changing this behavior. Apparently now it's more important for people, instead of being there, is documenting that they're there. So instead of just enjoying being there, they want to prove to the other that they're there, and you're videotaping the whole thing on a poor quality sound and video to prosecute to the entire world that I'm there. For me, it's about a kind of a strange kind of habit or behavior, but nevertheless, this is the emerging millennial kind of behavior that is coming up and changing the world that we interact with each other, the way we communicate with each other. A famous quote by Bill Gates is that we always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10. And this is a good example of. If we look, in history in the computer industry, there have been a number of so-called technology shifts. The first one was back in the beginning of the 70s when we went from the mainframes to the first mini computers. This led to a number of new businesses coming up, a number of new businesses going down, old businesses going down. Second one was around introduction of the PC. Third one, desktop internet, and the fourth one is the so-called mobile internet. Now, at the moment, we're in around this year, 2015. What's interesting is that, as you see, this is a collection of S-curves. Now, the point is, each time, actually, that you have an S-curve flattening out, another one starting up, this is where you see the technology shift happening. This is where you see new business coming up, other businesses are not catching up and are collapsing. What was interesting also is looking at the number of devices. It says here 10 billion units. First, when I saw this, I said, no, that's impossible. I mean, we're about 6-7 billion people on the globe. But then I just started doing the math. I mean, I have 2 laptops. I have one. My wife has one. I have a number of mobile devices. I have an iPad. And I have a few other items in my home which do contain a computer. My fridge has a computer. I don't know what it does, but it does actually have a computer built in. My car does have a computer as well. So the point is, we're getting there where we have the Internet of Things. Basically, I think Paul Girard is giving a keynote this afternoon. But we see an explosion basically of devices connected to the Internet, which is creating a lot of new opportunity, but at the same time also a lot of new challenges. So basically, with each S-curve flattening out, another one starting up, this is where we see the technology shift. Now, this is all creating data. Some of the reports by Gartner, some of the analyst companies state that by the year 2020, which is about, in the foreseeable futures, 5 years from now, the number of data that needs to be managed will increase by 50 times, while the number of IT professionals will only increase by 1.5 times. What does it mean? Well, just to give you an idea of what's happening. Each day, 2.5 quintillion bytes are being generated. And what's also interesting is that 90% of the data that has been created in the last 2 years, 90% of the data that exists today has been created in the last 2 years. $83.8 exabyte, this is how much data is being created, IP traffic is happening each month. Now, I'm not a smart guy, so I don't know what an exabyte is. I assume it's one with a lot of number of zeros. But it's equivalent to about 50,000 years of DVD video streaming, even much more than my own teenage daughter can see in a month. So this is a huge volume of data, and this is just increasing. So basically, what does it mean? These companies that we show an example of before, the Instagram, Apple, Facebook, and some of the others, have figured out that the new oil is data, and is the ability actually to connect the data that's creating the new business for them. This is what we at Cognizant coined by the term code halos. For each like, for each swipe, deposit, jog, thumbs up, thumbs down, for each comment and search you make, you're creating some data, some virtual trail that's creating a unique identity, a code halos. And it's the ability of these companies to analyze these code halos that is creating the new business. I don't know if you've ever had the experience that when you go to Spotify, for example, Google and Amazon, you have a feeling that, hey, these are reading my mind. You know, I just put a search for one book and it's coming up with other books that are also interesting. I'm just looking for one movie and the others actually sound very good. How come they know my taste in movies? They have these sophisticated algorithms that will make them actually come with some very good suggestions for you. So for Amazon, for example, the suggestive business, so to speak, is now accounting for more than 20% of the entire business of Amazon. They suggest products and books and other stuff for you that you feel is the right choice because they know you. This is the ability of analyzing your code halos, basically. These companies, as mentioned, have been able to put the pieces together. They figure out basically how to create a business out of the data they're connecting from different sources. Let's take an example. Any of you are on Spotify or other iTunes? Okay. Now, do you think that just by looking at your playlist, people can figure out some data about yourself? You think so? You're right. In the US, for example, I have some US-centric examples. I need to update those for Asia, but I know very little about the leading musicians here in Asia, Malaysia, so you have to bear, keep that in context there. If you like Garth Brooks, for example, 95% chance is that you vote actually Republican. If your favorite artist is Madonna, you vote Democrat. That's a correlation. That might be clear, but sometimes you have some very interesting correlation. Any Justin Timberlake fans here? In the audience? Any fans? One fan. Now, a correlation that they've been made is that if you like Justin Timberlake, chances are you also like Pixar films. Okay. Here's another one. Any Jimi Hendrix fans? I have one at least here in the first row. If you like Jimi Hendrix, there's a big likelihood that you also like science fiction. True. Okay. Now, just by looking at your playlist, people can also figure out about your relationship. Whether you're married, whether you're divorced, whether you want to find a mate, whether actually you want to get divorced, just by looking at your playlist, which is quite interesting. They can figure out your age. Most of us have made our preferences, musical preferences, from the age of 15 to 25. And I personally find myself going back to listen to the music I was brought up with back in the 80s. So just by looking at your playlist, they're able to deduct a lot of information. They can figure out your family background, whether you're coming from the countryside, whether you're coming from the suburbs, or whether you're coming from the very urban places of Copenhagen. Just by looking at your playlist, people can also figure out a lot about your IQ and your income. Now, an interesting analysis that has been done on the website called Music That Makes You Dumb. They've done some analysis looking at the favorite musicians people put on the websites. And then they went to that particular university and looked at the average score of the students at that particular university. And by putting these two data together, they were able to compile this list. I remember, a couple of months back, I was passing by my daughter's room, and she was listening to Beyonce. And I looked it up and said, oh God, she's up here. This is bad. I mean, this is bad for you. Your future is gone now. I went back to my stack of, I looked up and I saw U2 is up here. Bob Dylan. So I went to my, my record collection and my CD collection and got a stack of U2 and Bob Dylan and went into her room and said, hey, you should be listening to those. And she just looked at me and said, CDs? You're so last millennium. I don't even have a CD player. Look it up. It still exists. I mean, obviously there's a bit of humor in that, but nevertheless, the idea is that this is where the power of correlation come into play. Now, there's a number of code halo amplifiers. The wearables, and I'm wearing, for example, this Garmin device. It will count the number of steps I will take, number of calories I will burn throughout the day, and so forth. I have for example, a car. It's a Volvo. It's 60. It's a connected car, so my car actually can go onto the internet. Now, in my car, I have a GPS system. I can play my playlist on the radio. I have a navigation system, and I have a computer that will keep track of the engine. It will remind me when the car is about to go to service. Now, imagine what will happen. I mean, this has not happened yet. When Volvo will start connecting the dots. What do I mean? I would reckon that in order for an insurance company to provide a car insurance for me, they want to know a lot about my driving pattern, whereabout I go, how I basically behave once I'm driving. Do I accelerate too much? Do I deaccelerate, and so forth? In my view, my company, based on that knowledge, piecing together the GPS information where I drive, my driving pattern, looking at my music taste, should be able to come up with a very good insurance product for myself. This is an example of where it's going. So a lot of the companies that are now under threat are, for example, banks. We see basically is the trend many places. The traditional banks are under pressure. Why? Because other alternative businesses coming up and taking a piece of that pie. An example that you might not, see, or maybe something that you didn't see coming is Starbucks. Starbucks is a bank. Why? They've created these, loyalty cards where people can put money on. Now, someone did a calculation that if you put all the money that you have on these cards together, this is equivalent to a small bank. Other businesses under threat will be, for example, credit card companies. Why do you need a credit card in the future? Let's start thinking about it. I mean, you can do the transaction now using your mobile devices. I've heard some people have even, have operated an NCF chip into their hands, and they're using basically their, biometrics in order to complete transactions. So do you still need a credit card? Maybe not. So as mentioned, from a business point of view, it's all about knowing the exact needs and preferences of user and connecting all the dots. Knowing your music taste, what kind of music, what kind of movies you've seen, what kind of books you're purchasing, and so forth. This is all about the code halos. So how is this impacting testing and QA? First of all, this is changing the focus. It's creating a new model of testing where confirming requirements might not be the first priority. It's rather having a holistic view, knowing that your product is a part of this cycle means you probably need to look at it differently. You also know that the chain is never stronger than the weakest link. And you know that some of the weakest links are when you pass data from one application to another. Now, you've probably seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow, some years back, he did an analysis, of what motivates people. He wants to understand basically what makes people want to aspire. And he created this pyramid showing basically that the idea is that there are some basic needs, mostly, psychological, that need to be fulfilled before progressing to higher, more advanced, like growth kind of needs. I've seen a variation of that, putting Wi-Fi at the bottom. But if you look at it from a testing point of view, and I know that there have been a few other variations of this, it's putting basically deployability at the bottom of the whole thing. Why? You might have the best features in the world in your application. But if people are not able to find, access your app and get it and install it in a nice and convenient way, then there's no point in progressing. You need to get it first. Now, this also means that we are in the mercy of some of the app stores and Google Play companies, basically, where they are controlling what they can publish on the web. Functionality is, of course, still important because you still need to have the basic features in place. But interoperability is becoming increasingly important. Why? Because you have the connectivity between your app and a number of other dominating apps like Twitter, like LinkedIn, Facebook, and so forth. And we've recently also seen a number of breaches where some data is being either passed incorrectly or some malicious attempts of extracting some data has been done and breached, security or privacy of people. So the next layer obviously would be the non-functional aspects, and here, of course, security, performance, reliability play a very important role. We've seen basically a lot of this is so-called the dark side of the whole code halo thing. Credit cards being, numbers being sent out on the web, number of private data being, being exposed. Pictures that people have thought, oh, I'm only using snapshots, going to disappear. Suddenly it gone live of the internet because someone has snapped the data. So these are the areas that are becoming increasingly important. Last and not least, usefulness. At the end of the day, people want to complete something that will make their lives easier. Now, the thing is, this will also feed back. If you find an application useful and you like it, you review it and you share that with your friends, it leads back to the first point with regarding deployability. More people want to get it, install it, and tell about it, so you have this cycle. I found this definition of usability from '98, which is still quite interesting, basically saying that usability is effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction with which a specified set of users can achieve a specified set of tasks in a particular environment. And I think it's quite interesting to see that despite of the whole evolution in the technology and the whole technology shift that we were talking about, it's still, at the end of the day, it's all about making a usable and friendly product for our consumers. By the way, there are a few other variations of this. I found at least two on the internet. There's one by Goico, which was quite good. Also nicely explained. Another one by Chris Ambler. So how do you get the information from your customers? One way, this is getting very popular, so-called social listening. A number of tools out there. Basically, the idea behind those is to what are being posted out on the internet? What are people saying on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and other media, and collecting these information and processing those through analytics. Now this gave us some insight into how we can do testing that was not possible before. I remember some years back, we wanted to handle the whole requirements thing. We would get some insight, typically from actually sales and marketing, who will contact some users or get a representative of the users who come in, and then we'll create the requirements based on the insight provided by these people, domain experts. Now with social listening, you can get the data directly from the people, from the large crowds. Now, what we've also seen in the past is that we have, maybe you remember this game from school, when I will be whispering something in Dot's ears and she'll do that for Sereta and so forth. You remember that game? I think it's called Chinese Whispers. Now what will happen is, of course, at the end of the whole thing, I probably will not recognize what has been said originally, because the message gets diluted each time. This was also what was happening to a large extent to requirements. Yeah? Someone will get requirements from the market, and then he'll whisper it to some of the lead developers who do the whispering to some the programmers who do the implementation, and someone will whisper that to the testers who will try to figure out what was the original requirement in the first place. So the point is, it's getting diluted step by step. With social listening, you can tap the information directly at the source, and there are tools available out there for that. This is where also the whole power of analytics come into the play. First of all, it allows us to identify some of the needs that the user maybe didn't recognize that they have in the first place. It allows us, from a testing point of view, to focus on certain areas. It allows us a more proactive, pragmatic approach for risk-based testing. What do you mean by that? Typically, when you do a product risk, I know Clive did a tutorial in the beginning of the week. I'm doing a session today. Risk-based testing is all about tailoring your test strategy to meet your risk profile of your product. And the way you handle this is typically by trying to identify the likelihood of things going wrong and the impact if it goes wrong. Now, through analytics, you're able to tailor that strategy. You're able to tap information that will give you some tactics. I mean, the thing is, you might have done a very good job in analyzing all the requirements, identifying your functional needs, doing the risk analysis, but hey, maybe your users will use it in a different way that was originally intended. So using analytics, you'll be able to get some information that allow us to create a more pragmatic, a revised approach for your risk analysis. It allows you to optimize your test coverage. For example, knowing what kind of devices are your apps being used on. Again, there's a big difference between trying to do a qualified guess, figure out what kind of devices are out there and what do we need to test on. But here you have an ability of getting that information directly from the source. Last but not least, you have the information of getting early feedback from your customers. Now, one way of handling the whole stack testing is shifting some of the testing to your end customers. Some are already doing that. Some customers already know that. They'll be a part of doing beta testing. They'll be part of user-defined testing. Others will not know that. I'll get back to that point in a while. So it's all about reading your user's code halo, and based on that, tailoring your test strategy to meet that. Let me show a couple of examples of some of the focus areas and techniques. First one is the whole user-centric approach, which is about, as mentioned, involving shifting the testing load to your users. So instead of you doing the testing, you can let your customers do the testing. It's a cheap way of doing a lot of good testing. I'm going to give an example of how this can be done. There are a few techniques out there. I'll not go through each and every technique, but I'll show a couple of examples. One of them is called A/B and multivariate testing. The idea behind that is, let's say that you have a website, and you want to test a few new features of your website. So what you typically do is you release 2 instances simultaneously, put 2 versions in production. And you monitor 50% of the users, how they're using one version. You monitor how the remaining are using the existing version and compare those, and you see where do you have the highest conversion rate. So you're letting actually your customers do the testing, and based on that you can decide whether you want to continue with version A or version B. Another variation of that is called multivariate, where basically we're taking a number of features, number of variations, and exposing those to a different number of users and seeing their response, how they react on these features. This is used often in the so-called ramp deployment testing. Last year we were helping LinkedIn some of the testing, and they use this approach. Basically, the idea is they incrementally are deploying into production, having the user do the testing, and based on the feedback they're getting from the users, they decide whether they want to proceed with that feature or take it out. So the idea is that if you encounter some issues, you roll it back. Now I was looking, for example, apparently I was doing testing without even knowing that I would do a part of that testing. I was looking at my screen on LinkedIn. It was looking differently than my colleagues, because apparently he was not a part of the group that was involved in doing the testing. This is a smart way of controlling the features that are being released, making sure that basically you're making decisions based on the reaction you're getting and doing that promptly. Another variation of that is gamification. You've probably seen that. There are games out there and Facebook, what is your favorite color? Hey, I know the answer. Basically what you're doing, you're helping the company do, for example, performance testing. You're helping company achieving some of the testing that they wanted to shift to you, which is quite smart. Another area is the so-called BA, Business Analyst QA area, which is basically us testers getting more domain knowledge, getting more involved in the early phases, the whole shift left kind of activities. Last but not least, the whole non-functional area, which is becoming increasingly important, as mentioned. One aspect I want to mention, for obvious reasons, is monkey testing. I gave a speech here in Kuala Lumpur a couple of years back on the concept of monkey testing. At the time, I was giving it in the context of testing medical devices. This is where, this is my background, this is where I used it in the past. And the idea behind it is basically to allow some kind of randomness into the testing. At the time, let's go back to the latest century, 1999 basically. We're doing a lot of testing at the time on medical devices. And we wanted to introduce some randomness into the testing. So the idea behind that, or the concept that emerged at the time, was what we called test monkeys. The idea was to have a list of actions and select randomly between these actions and execute those on the application we are testing, and just monitor how long does it take to break the application. This will give you a measure of the reliability and the resilience of the application. We wanted, because it was a medical device, we wanted it at least to, if it will encounter some issues, if it will crash, at least it will recover gracefully, because it's a medical device. You don't want it to be hanging in an undefined state. So this is a bit like, I typically use the analogy of walking through a minefield when I describe this concept. I know it's quite a gloomy kind of analogy, but if we, imagine this is a minefield, what is for me the best way of getting through the minefield without getting blown to pieces? Any suggestions? Follow someone else, exactly. Let someone else volunteer, and if this person makes it, I'll be walking in the same footprints of that person. Now, this is typically what we're doing in regression testing. Yeah? We're repeating the same, sequence of events over and over again. And don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of regression testing, and still needs to be done. But what it doesn't allow is, of course, this dynamic change of actions. Point is, many users will not use your applications in the way that is intended. Some users, believe it or not, don't read the manual. I mean, how many times have you read the manual when you bought a new mobile or any kind of device? So the point is, this randomness allows this dynamic view on the testing that, that needs to be done. Now, I thought at the time that, this is something that is, focused on medical devices and embedded software. But what is happening in the last, I would say 5 to 10 years is that these are being picked up by some of Netflix, LinkedIn, Google, or these type of companies that have a wide, user base that they want to test basically the resilience of their application against unintended or unthought about actions. So Netflix, for example, you probably heard that a few years back they had this breakdown, and they went, basically black for a couple of hours, and they lost, millions of dollars, in these 2 hours. And the reason behind that was there was a backup and recovery mechanism didn't work. They had one server going.
Here you go.
Here you go. Another one went down. So basically, they had one server going down, and the other server that was going to pick up didn't do that in time. So after that event, they created a so-called simian army, which is basically an army of robots doing random testing on their infrastructure, taking different pieces and components out, and the whole idea is to test the resilience and the reliability of the whole thing. Does the whole thing recover? What is the impact on performance? All these kind of things are being tested by using the simian armies. They've also created a few versions. They've created I think they have names like a family of monkeys that they're using. They have one focusing on security. They have security monkey. They have performance monkey, and so forth. But the idea is that you're creating some kind of randomness, some kind of dynamics that is not there in the static testing that you're doing, or your testing that is more based on regression. So this is one of the new things that is emerging in the new era of digital testing. Now, I've also tried to look at this chart, what we've seen before, from a testing point of view, looking at what happened over the years, what kind of trends did happen, and the main conclusion is that obviously testing is a bit lagging behind. In the sense, obviously, that the technology, since testing is not dictating the technology shift, there's at least 5 to 10 years delay between when we see a new technology shift and when testing approach starts kicking in. So, for example, the waterfall model came in the year in 1970, which is by the end of the mainframe era. Obviously, testing and the mainframe. And the waterfall model was adapted before that and put into use that. But the first mention of the waterfall model by Rhodes was in 1970. The first book on testing, I know it's not the first one, but one that is being, I'll say the first one that mentioned the testing in the title, the art of software testing, came out in the end of 1997 and 79, sorry, which was basically by the end of the mini computer era. Agile Manifesto, I'm going to skip a few, came in 2001, which was a reaction to basically the whole PC-based era that we've seen before that. So basically now we are getting into a new era. I call that the digital testing era. And this is redefining the tester position and role. So we see basically a shift up approach. Basically, as mentioned, we want to get closer to the users. So this is where we see a lot of new trends in terms of business assurance, business process modeling, monitoring user experience coming up. At the same time, we see a shift left. This has been going on for quite a while. Basically, in terms of moment of involvement, getting early on, analyzing requirements, being a part of the cross-functional groups if you're working in Agile, performance engineering, and so forth. We're seeing at the same time so-called shift right. We're getting closer to production. The ramp development testing that I've shown an example of before, whole DevOps thing that is happening, continuous integration and delivery, is putting us closer to the infrastructure, to the operations. So this is, from a testing point of view, it's a shift right. And at the same time, we're seeing a shift down or go deep, basically, working closer with developers, test-driven development, doing dynamic analysis of code, and so forth. So what does it mean? We're shifting up, we're shifting down, we're shifting left, and we're shifting right. Does it mean we're shifting out? No, I don't believe so. I believe actually that this is just a redefinition of our position. So basically, I believe that, for example, functional testing will start diminishing. The need for functional testing will decrease, and the others will become more important. Another area that I will see, we'll probably see a big shift towards, it's testing on demand or testing as a service. This is basically ordering the testing whenever you need it. I'm currently involved in a testing project at a company in Denmark, and we wanted to introduce automation at the company. They had a number they wanted to test their application across multiple browsers and multiple operating systems. Now, I was first thinking for the traditional way of, I need to get 10 different computers with different operating systems, and then we can configure those differently and install. We can have Safari on one, and we can have, Internet Explorer on the second. We can have what have you on the third, and so forth. But thinking about it, we discovered that we don't need this, because I just remember, if we take that 10 years back, the time it will take for me to get this in place. Just imagine the paperwork. I need to fill in a lot of forms, send it to my manager, who will need to approve and send it to his manager, get the budget approved, and then someone will ship the note to the company, and then they, send the number of PCs, and then you need to install the operating system, and then you need to configure those, and it will be first a logistical nightmare, and it will take forever. It will take something between 3 weeks to 3 months before I just get the equipment that I need. Now, I figured out actually there was this company called Test Chameleon, German company. Went to the website. We can order a test environment in 5 minutes. Like you can buy your books on Amazon. At Amazon, you can just swipe your credit card and get an operating system, basically an environment with an operating system with a combination of a browser that you need. And what's more beautiful is that they will also put in the plugins for your Selenium automation. So basically what you all need is just deploy your automation code from your machines to the cloud, and you'll be doing the testing on demand. This will increase. The power that you have there is amazing. And it will only cost like $100 a month or something like that. So it's cheap. What you see now is that for all the domain agnostic services, you'll see a pickup in test as a service offerings. All the services that do not require deep understanding of your domain or your processes probably be substituted by a test as a service offering. Might even be supported by crowdsourcing. Give you an example. Performance testing. If you have a website, you need to do the performance testing of that website. You don't need to be an expert in the business of that particular company. It's just a website. If you have information about what kind of process you want to cover, this can be done from anywhere by anyone, by a person or by a machine, as a service. You don't even need the tools for that, because a tool you can get as a part of the service. It's all about the user experience, putting yourself in the shoes of the customer, as mentioned. So the next step will probably be that as you shift more and more testing to your end users, the need for having more advanced analytics will become evident. So you'll need algorithms. You test algorithms. You need the machine power to be able to analyze and process all this data that the users are providing. So in short, I believe that going into the digital testing era is changing the playbook that we have. First of all, we are in, as mentioned, a shift point where we basically, the previous S-curve is flattening out, the new one is starting up. And I believe what's happening is, first of all, is creating a new identity for testers. First one is moving away the focus from finding defects to identifying patterns. Basically, again, tapping into what users are doing, identifying where bugs can be potentially hiding. Another one is from activity to platforms. So instead of having basically a dedicated system test activity, you'll be having your activities spread over a number of phases supported by platforms. Shift up will create more, the need of user advocacy, either by us testers picking up domain expertise or by involving to a larger degree end users. And again, we'll be going away from hardware-bound environments to virtualized environments. A good example of the kind of power that's coming up, the whole service virtualization tools that you probably have heard of, are creating new opportunities for us. It means I can also start early with my testing. For example, if I have my application connected to external web services, to a database, to a mainframe, I can virtualize these components and start the testing early. The degree of automation will obviously increase, both by introduction of random tools, simian armies, but again, having an automation incorporated as a part of testing instead of seen it as a separate activity. And we will also see gradually a shift from conforming requirements, from just reading, making sure that we can meet the requirement, to monitoring user behavior. Again, by tapping into the information, the code halos of the users. A couple of other things, of course, is that we'll probably start looking at what are the core skills that we need in our teams, and what can we tap from the outside world. Nowadays, we have a connected world. We have a global pool of testers. You have crowdsourcing. You have companies that will be able to provide testers, around the globe. So the fact that you're lacking an automation expert or a performance expert doesn't mean they cannot do the testing. It means that you can maybe get it on demand whenever you need it. Last but not least, of course, is that we'll be shifting away from focusing only on the functionality, which will start diminishing, to having a holistic quality view. So in summary, I believe that we've only seen the top of the iceberg. Our terrain is changing day by day. And the keys, of course, for us to survive is to adapt. One way would be just ignoring the whole thing and hoping it'll go away. which will probably be a better idea. Another thing would be looking at the opportunities, the whole SMAC stack is bringing to us, and trying to exploit those opportunities to our benefits. With these words, I would say thank you very much for listening. There's some, you can get some further information on I have a couple of links for you. One is called Future of Work, where you have a lot of the whole videos and this concept of code halos is explained. You can get actually in the book itself, you can download from Google Play or App Store. Another website is Seeing Things Differently, where you can see it more from a testing point of view, some of the concepts that are available to that. So thank you very much for your attention, and enjoy the rest of the day.